Hi Chris, thanks for the footage. In relation to your desired goal of just improving your consistency of that little fade shot, I just wanted to isolate the two key areas for you here before I go into sort of analysing and critiquing your action and giving you some ideas to work on. The two main areas in isolation that you need to improve are the path the hands take through the ball. I'll touch on your backswing. You mentioned in one of your messages that there was a couple of swings where you were trying to improve your position at the top, and I'll just give you some thoughts on that you can play around with. But by and large, you get into a really good delivery position. So your priorities are what the hands, or the path of the hands from delivery, which is when the shaft's parallel to the ground in the downswing, like you see me on the left hand side, and the wrist angles, which affect the face to path relationship that you're trying to create. So in order for you to develop that little fade shot, we want the face slightly open to the path of the golf club. The path of the golf club and the face's relationship to it are directly affected by the path the hands take through the ball and the accompanying wrist conditions that you have through the ball as well. So on the left, I'm just going to demonstrate three basic hand paths. So from pretty much the same delivery position each time, the hands can swing outwards. So you can see there the red line down the trail arm, and then the red arrow would be a rough indication of the path the hands are taking if you were viewing the swing from above. The hands can come gradually inwards and upwards from the same delivery position. So that would be trail arm angled in across the chest about 30 degrees. Yellow line down on the ground, or yellow arrow down on the ground. And then the hands can come quickly across you, maybe this next one, 40-50 degrees. That would be very evident in a better player hitting a wedge shot or a bunker shot or a flop shot, certainly coming across the ball more. The exit would be lower. Not necessarily what you're going to see with driver, but the three basic hand paths that you can create on the way through. And also the wrist conditions are appropriate. So if the handle raises and the wrists uncock, you can see the club face closes. And if the handle is lower and the wrists are cocking quicker, so there's a little bit of a recock through the hit, you can see the face opens. So if you're trying to hit just bear this in mind when we look at your swing, particularly down the line. If you're trying to hit a soft fade where you're just aiming down the left side of the fairway or into the left side of the green, and you have a handle that's very high, wrists that are uncocking quickly through the hit, they will also be accompanied by a hand path that is out to the right too much. I'm just going to work this one back now, so you'd be more down the red line. If you look at when the hands go down the red line more, which will be the next one coming up, hands go out, you see how the wrists uncock more. So if you look at that angle, I'm going to get rid of these for a second, between the left arm and the shaft, when the hands are going out, that is more uncocked than when the hands start to come in more. So hands coming in usually results in a more hinged position. Hands going out usually results in a more unhinged position. So the hands going out, see on that one's even greater. Wrists uncocking and not ideal for a fade shot because of the wrists uncock. The club face closes to the path, so that's your little sort of pull draw aiming for a fade, drawing it to the left-hand bunker scenario that you've explained in your messages to me beforehand. So path of the hands through the ball and the way the wrists work, which affects the face's relationship to the path, are your two main priorities. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get your swings up, and you're going to see how those pieces that I've just been discussing fit into your swing at this moment in time. Okay, so we've got the red line here going up the shaft at address. If the hands are sort of tracing that plane through the hit, you would expect to see them working on this arc through impact. Now this applies to both clubs. Two good examples here of where your slight inconsistencies are coming from. If the hands worked out this way too much, so remember this is as though you're viewing your swing from above, then that wouldn't be terribly appropriate for hitting a fade. When you stand behind the worst golfers at your club, what you tend to see is their hands come quickly across them on the way through, which is why most of the time they're very steep, hit lots of pulls, slices, and struggle to draw the golf ball. With a better player, you tend to see the player's hands tracing the arc post impact. So what we don't want to see is we don't want to see the handle raising too much and the arms getting away from us too much on the way through on these shots. So what I'm going to do is, and bear in mind there's a little bit of camera wobble on both of these swings, so I'm going to cut you a little bit of slack on it, particularly the one on the right. So what we've said before is we're coming into a pretty good position as we approach delivery on both an iron and what looks like to be a 3-wood. It looks like 18 off on the 7th there on the right. And in both instances what we see, I'm just going to play the one on the left through first, we see the handle raising quite substantially from where it was at address, which was the red line. And we see the hands going out and away from you too much on the way through. And as we were looking at before when I isolated the moves for you, you can see there's very little angle now between your arm and the club. And if I just run that through again, you can see the club face is wrapping over quite severely through the hit. Start to recock the wrist, which disguises it a little bit as you exit. But again, that move through the ball with the hands going away from you, the right arm straightening out quite quickly. You can see the right elbow moving away from you as well. Is not what you'd expect to see from a player who's trying to fade the golf ball. And I'll get a good model up for you shortly. That again you can relate this to. I'm going to use your 3-wood when we do that, because the model I'm going to use is using a 3-wood as well. When we look at it on the right hand side, you're going to see a more exaggerated version of what we've just seen. So you can see as you come in, the shaft starts to drop under. The camera angle is slightly different, but again the handle and the hands and arms work away from you, and you can see the club face rotating over a little bit more. Again, not what you'd expect to see from a player hitting a fade. So you can see all the angles in the wrists are coming out, which means it's then easier. The more angle comes out in the wrists, the easier it is to rotate the club face, and the unhinging of the wrist is already closing the club face. So that's why your hand path is a little bit too much out away from you, and the club face is closing down a little bit too quickly, and that's the shot pattern that you're explaining. The longer the club, the more exaggerated that is, which is why you see much more wrap over on the club with your 3-wood than you do with what looks to be a 6 or a 7 iron on the left hand side. You're hitting into the 3rd, I think there, so I would imagine it's around about a 6 or a 7. So similar tendencies, different overall look. Because of the club that's being used. But in both instances, from delivery through the ball, so from shaft parallel with the ground in the downswing to shaft parallel with the ground in the through swing, the hand path is too much out to the right, too much down the yellow line, and the wrist angles are uncocking too quick, which is a good matchup anyway. When you see one, you expect to see the other, and that's more conducive to hitting high draws. And your tendency might be to block the occasional one, which you touched on before, and there's also a little bit of something in your backswing that I'm going to mention on that, than it is hitting softer fades. So your hand path through the ball, your wrist conditions through the ball is not massively conducive and doesn't match up terribly well with the type of shot pattern that you're trying to hit and the type of shot pattern that you envisage when you're at the golf course. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get a model swing for you up on the left, and he's hitting 3-wood as well. It's Robert Rock, and let you have a little look at what his action's like through the ball, so that you can start to get a visual on the types of moves that you'd want to make and the types of changes that you'd want to implement when practicing. Okay, so Robert Rock on the left through the ball. You can see there's a lot of similarities as you're coming into delivery. Your wrist angles are a little bit more severe than his are, which means you've got to flatten out the wrists a little bit quicker, so it won't look exactly the same, but you'll get the general feel and idea, and more importantly visual, of what you've got to try and achieve through the hit. So with yourself, we've already looked at your hands. Rather than tracing the arc, which would be the red lines, tend to get moved away from you a little bit too much. So as you come through the hit, the visual that we have and the sort of the overall look that we have is wrists uncocking, hands working away from you. So wrists uncock, hands work away. When we watch Robert Rock coming through the ball, you see that the hands trace the red lines or red arrows more, and the arms don't get flung away from the body as much. So his hand path's very neutral. It's not, severely to the left, but the hands are certainly tracing the arc through the hit. You see the butt of the club disappears across the body much sooner than we see with yourself. So see how his arms and his hands are starting to trace the arc through the hit, whereas yours are being flung off the arc through the hit. When you then look at the exit, you see that Robert's shaft exits below the level of the shoulders. Yours is exiting more on the shoulder. Whenever you see a hand path that's away from the player, you see a club face that closes down much more severely. Whenever you see the hand path come inwards a little bit more, it means that the wrists are not uncocking as fast, which means the club face can be more stable through the hit. So do the wrists uncock through the hit? Yes, they do. The rate at which they uncock is very, very important. And one way of policing that is to control the path of the hands through the hit. So if we look at this position we're in now, one very, very sort of evident difference would be how much more on the torso Robert Rock's right arm is compared to yourself. So one little exercise you can work on is tucking the sleeve of your sweater or trapping a glove beneath your trail arm, beneath your right arm, probably around about sort of 2-3 inches below the level of your armpits, around about the top half of your bicep, and keep that trapped under your arm throughout the swing. That would actually help you with your backswing a little bit as well, in regards to a different look at the top, which again I'll just touch on briefly towards the end of this session. But more importantly for you, that would be just to give you the feel of the hand path. So when you're doing that exercise, I mean, you literally don't need to swing much further back than chest height. And once you're at chest height, swing through to chest height. And if your hands get away from your body too much, like you're getting in this instance, then the glove would drop out from beneath your arm. So keeping the glove beneath your arm throughout the swing would just lower the hand path ever so slightly and mean that the wrist action is going to calm down, which means that the face will close down less to the path of the club. So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing this would be to hit some shots with a sort of bar in place. If you've sort of got the range basket or your golf bag out in front of you, say in this position here, and have an alignment cane coming out maybe just around about elbow level, and if your hand path's correct, you'd pass beneath the level of the cane. So this would be through impact of you popping the shop. You're not popping the shop at the moment with what's going on, obviously, but if you want that, a picture of how to set that up, I'll send something across. I'll attach that to the follow-up on this lesson. So again, lowering the exit, encouraging the wrist angles to stay in just a little bit longer. You can imagine if you were here now and you've got basket, sort of target side of the ball, cane coming out of the basket, just to police the trajectory of the hands as you're coming through now. Put the cane in the right place to give you the point. Instead of passing beneath the cane, the hands would come out and hit the cane, so swinging out too much to the right rather than swinging more to the left. So that's another way of practicing this. And another really useful visual is to put a cane on the ground or a club on the ground, target side of the ball, in line with the stance line. Put this one in the back space. So cane on the ground, instead of pointing it at the target, angle it in about 30 degrees. And then as you're coming through, the feeling would be to try and match the right arm up with the cane that's on the ground. So you can see the Roberts right arm is starting to match up with this line here. If your cane was angled in 30 degrees, as you're coming through the hit, your trail arm is pretty much looking straight down the target. So the feel there will be to get the trail arm to match up with the shaft through the hit. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to, and I'll email you this separately, I will set up the drills that I've just explained to you, do a quick video of me demonstrating the drill, send them across to you, and then you can play around with the 3 exercises, glove under the arm, exiting beneath the cane, or matching the trail arm up with the cane that's on the ground, and you can get a feel for whichever you like the best. It may be that you cycle around between the 3, it may be that you have one specific one that helps, and what would be really interesting if you can in the next couple of days, I don't know how much access you've got to hitting balls at the minute, if you could get some footage across of you doing the drills, preferably down the line. There's not much you need to work on from face on, not at this point at least, and then I can make a comparison between the two for you, so you can start to see the differences and the changes and get a feel for where that's going to benefit you in regards to the shot pattern that you're trying to create. So just before we finish, I'm just going to get you down the line swing up where you talked about making a slightly different swing and or slightly different position at the top, and just give you a thought or two on that. Okay, so if we consider the 2 positions at the top, obviously a completely different alignment of the shaft. Club face looks a little bit better as well, a little bit less shut. The reason for that is because, and we mentioned this in your lesson about squeezing something beneath the trail arm. If you squeeze the glove beneath the trail arm, what you will do is you will externally rotate the trail elbow and trail shoulder more. And what that will then do is start to move the club face and the shaft of the club into a more inline condition at the top, which is what you're seeing on the left hand side. So I don't know what your feels are there. I just picked up on one of your messages that you were trying a different backswing out. One thing that would make things a little bit easier for you as well, just food for thought in the backswing, it would help you balance your setup up a little bit from face on as well. It's just turn that right foot out a little bit more and just allow that right leg to straighten a little bit more, so don't resist quite as much with that trail leg. And that would also then allow you to make the move that you're trying to make on the left hand side in a more efficient manner. You wouldn't have to work as hard, and you wouldn't default back to what you see on the right quite as much. Interestingly, when you look at the path of the hands on the left hand swing in relation to what we're talking about before in your lesson, you can see the overall look is much more low and left. So that has the club disappearing across the body a little bit quicker, as we saw with Robert Rock, as opposed to hitting out excessively and unhinging the wrists quickly, like we see on the right hand side. Not a like for like comparison, because obviously one's an iron and one's a 3-wood. You see the exit's a little bit lower, the hand pat's a little bit more to the left, etc, etc. So this is not something that you don't necessarily do every time, but it is something that you want to become a little bit more efficient at doing on certain occasions when you don't want that ball going left on you. Good luck with it. Like I say, I'll pass on some further videos showing you how to do the drills, etc. And you can offer me some feedback ASAP.